The nightmare always began the same way. A pair of trembling hands reached toward him through smoke. A woman's voice, barely audible beneath the roar of flames. "Con, run!" Gunshots echoed across a grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers crashed from the ceiling. People screamed. Fire swallowed everything. On the polished marble floor lay a man dressed in a black tuxedo, blood spreading beneath him. His father. A loud explosion shook the building. The flames rushed toward him. Then, darkness. Con's eyes snapped open. His chest rose and fell rapidly as sweat soaked his pillow. For several seconds, he simply stared at the ceiling. The digital clock beside his bed read 4:13 a.m. exactly the same time. Every night. For 20 years. He slowly sat up and rubbed the scar running across his right forearm, a reminder of the fire he barely survived. The nightmare had faded, but the feeling never did. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window of his apartment. The city below was still asleep. Cars drifted silently through rain-soaked streets. To everyone else, it was just another morning. For Con, it was another reminder that 20 years had passed, yet he was still trapped inside one night. A soft knock came from the apartment door. Con already knew who it was. Without asking, he unlocked it. Elias Mercer entered carrying 2 cups of black coffee. Although age had turned his hair silver, his posture remained straight, his expression calm. He had once been head of security for Con's father. Today, he was the closest thing Con had to family. "You slept." Con gave a faint smile. "I closed my eyes." Elias understood. Nightmares had become part of Con's life. He handed him a cup. "Today's the day." Con looked toward the city skyline. "I know. For 20 years, every lesson, every scar, every sacrifice had led to this moment. Today, he would finally step into the world of the people who had destroyed his family. 20 years earlier, the Grand Belmont Palace Hotel was unlike anything 5-year-old Con had ever seen. Golden chandeliers illuminated the enormous ballroom. A live orchestra played softly while Europe's wealthiest businessmen, politicians, diplomats, and celebrities mingled beneath painted ceilings. Waiters carried silver trays filled with crystal glasses. Luxury cars lined the entrance outside. It was the annual De Luca Foundation Charity Gala, one of the most exclusive events in Europe. Con had little interest in speeches or business. He was far too busy chasing the miniature remote-control airplane his father had given him earlier that evening. His laughter echoed through the ballroom. His mother knelt beside him and adjusted his bow tie. "You've already made 3 senators move out of your way." Con giggled. "They were standing where my airplane wanted to go." His father laughed loudly. "That's my son." Unlike many powerful businessmen, Con's father never allowed success to change him. He still made time for bedtime stories, still played football in the garden, still insisted on eating dinner with his family every evening. To Con, he wasn't one of Europe's most respected businessmen. He was simply Dad. As the evening continued, Con noticed something unusual. His father excused himself from a conversation and walked toward a private lounge. Standing there was an elderly man dressed in an immaculate black suit. Despite his age, he stood with absolute confidence. The entire room seemed to grow quieter whenever he spoke. Even politicians lowered their voices around him. This was Don Salvatore De Luca, founder of the De Luca Empire. Publicly, a legendary businessman and philanthropist. Privately, a man whose influence reached into every corner of Europe's criminal underworld. Beside him stood his son. This was Vittorio de Luca. Curious, Con quietly wandered closer. Not close enough to be noticed. Just close enough to hear fragments of the conversation. His father's voice was calm but firm. "I won't sign it." Don Salvatore smiled politely. "I wasn't asking. You've already taken enough. You still have a choice. My answer remains the same." The old man slowly folded his hands behind his back. "You disappoint me." Con didn't understand what they were discussing, but he saw something he had never seen before. His father looked afraid, not terrified, concerned, as if he knew something terrible was about to happen. His mother suddenly appeared beside Con. "There you are." She smiled warmly. "Come on. Dessert is waiting." As she led him away, Con looked back one last time. Don Salvatore was still smiling. Vittorio simply watched his father, learning, observing, almost admiring him. Dinner was served. Music filled the ballroom once more. The tension seemed to disappear. People laughed again. Photographers captured smiling faces. Charity donations were announced to everyone present. It appeared to be another perfect evening. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. The orchestra stopped playing. The emergency lights flashed red. A single gunshot echoed through the hotel. Silence followed. Then came another, and another. Panic spread instantly. Guests screamed. Bodyguards drew their weapons. People rushed toward the exits. Con looked around desperately. "Mama!" His mother had disappeared into the crowd. "Dad!" No answer. Smoke began filling the ballroom. Someone shouted, "Get down!" Automatic gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Windows shattered. The beautiful gala transformed into chaos within seconds. Con ran through the corridors searching for his parents. Everywhere he looked people were running, some crying, some injured. Security guards exchanged gunfire with masked attackers. The hotel alarms screamed. Then, a deafening explosion shook the building. The floor beneath him cracked. A wall collapsed. Fire burst through the hallway. The heat knocked him backward. "Khan!" He turned. His father stood at the far end of the corridor. Blood covered his white shirt. Even wounded, he forced himself toward his son. Before he could reach him, a gunshot rang out. His father collapsed onto the polished marble floor. "Dad!" Con ran toward him. His tiny hands grabbed his father's jacket. "Dad, please." His father struggled to breathe. With shaking hands, he pulled a small silver key from his pocket and placed it into Con's palm. "Never." He coughed blood. "Trust." His eyes searched desperately for someone. His voice faded. The sentence remained unfinished. His hand slipped away. Con shook him repeatedly. "Dad!" No response. "Khan!" His mother appeared through the smoke. She rushed toward him. Before she reached them, another explosion threw her against a marble pillar. She cried out in pain. Blood stained her dress. Still, she crawled toward her son, every movement slower than the last. She reached his face, placed a trembling hand on his cheek. Her tears mixed with the ash covering his skin. "Listen to me." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "You have to be brave." "I don't want to be brave. I want to go home." She smiled despite the pain. "I know." She kissed his forehead. "I love you." A burning beam crashed between them. The force threw Con backward. The last thing he saw was his mother reaching toward him through the flames. Then the ceiling collapsed. Darkness consumed everything. When Con opened his eyes again, he wasn't in the hotel. He was in his own bedroom. The familiar blue curtains hung beside the window. His toys still rested on the shelf. For one beautiful second, he believed it had all been a nightmare. Then he saw Elias sitting beside the bed. His clothes were torn. His face was bruised. His eyes were filled with grief. "Where's Mom?" Silence. "Dad." Elias lowered his head. Con's heart sank. "They're coming home." His voice trembled. "Right." Elias couldn't answer. That silence said everything. The little boy who had entered the charity gala with a family would leave it alone. Outside the bedroom window, black luxury cars slowly pulled through the gates of Con's estate. Men in expensive suits stepped out carrying legal documents. At their head stood Don Salvatore de Luca. From the upstairs window, Con watched strangers walk through his home as if it already belonged to them. He looked at Elias. "Who are they?" Elias clenched his fists. "The people who stole your future." Con pressed his small hand against the cold glass. The silver key his father had given him remained tightly clenched in his other hand. He didn't cry. Not anymore. Somewhere deep inside, something far more dangerous than grief had been born. Outside, Don Salvatore calmly looked toward the house. For just a moment, his eyes met the frightened little boy standing at the window. The old man offered the faintest smile. Then he turned away. He believed the last heir had been defeated. He couldn't have been more wrong, because on that night a child lost everything, and a devil began to grow. 3 days after the funeral, the world had already forgotten Con's family. Newspapers called the tragedy an unfortunate terrorist attack that claimed the lives of several prominent businessmen. Television channels mourned the victims for a week before moving on to the next headline. But behind closed doors, the truth had been buried. Every witness who had survived either changed their testimony or disappeared. The official investigation ended before it had truly begun. Don Salvatore de Luca attended the funeral wearing a black suit and offered his condolences to the cameras. His speech was calm, dignified, and convincing. No one suspected that the man mourning Con's parents was the same man who had ordered their deaths. Standing beside him was his son, Vittorio de Luca. He never shed a tear. He simply watched, learning, observing, remembering. Inside the family estate, silence had replaced laughter. The once lively halls felt lifeless. Family portraits still hung on the walls. Con's toys remained untouched. His mother's piano stood exactly where she had left it. Everything looked the same. Yet nothing felt alive anymore. Late one evening, Elias entered Con's bedroom carrying a wooden box. Inside were photographs, old letters, medals, and a leather journal belonging to Con's father. "There are things you deserve to know," Elias said quietly. Con looked at the journal. Did they kill them because of money? Elias shook his head. If it had only been money, your father would still be alive. He opened the journal to a marked page. Your father discovered something that powerful people were willing to kill to protect. What? I don't know. He never told me. He only said that if anything happened to him. Elias paused. The truth must survive. The next morning, Black luxury cars arrived outside the estate. Lawyers, corporate executives, government officials. They carried documents stamped with official seals. Con watched from the staircase as they informed Elias that the property, company, and every family asset had legally become part of the Luca group. The documents looked genuine. Every signature was perfect. Every approval had been authorized. Everything had been prepared before Con's parents were even buried. Elias understood immediately. This had never been a spontaneous murder. It had been planned for years. One executive looked toward Con. "I'm sorry, young man. This house no longer belongs to your family." Con looked around the home where he had been born. The walls, the paintings, entered his father's study, opened the desk drawer, and quietly placed the silver key his father had given him into his pocket. Then he left without looking back. For the next several years, Elias moved Con from one safe house to another across Europe. No records, no permanent address, no school under his real name. To the world, Con no longer existed. Instead of classrooms, his education came from Elias. Every morning began before sunrise. A 5-kilometer run. Balance exercises. Discipline. There were no excuses. There were no rewards. Only improvement. At first, Con hated it. His muscles ached. His hands blistered. His legs gave out from exhaustion. One evening, after collapsing during training, he shouted, "I can't do this." Elias stood over him. "You're right." Con looked up. "You can't. But the man who destroys the Luca Empire can. If you want revenge, become someone worthy of it." As the years passed, training became a way of life. By the age of 10, Con spoke fluent English, Italian, French, Arabic, and German. By 12, he understood economics better than most university graduates. He studied military history, psychology, corporate law, negotiation, and criminal organizations. Elias never allowed him to learn only how to fight. "A gun can kill a man," Elias often said, "but a signature can destroy an empire." Con learned to read financial statements as easily as he read novels. He memorized the structure of multinational corporations. He studied how criminal money moved through legitimate businesses. Slowly, he began understanding why his father had been murdered. The Luca Empire wasn't just a crime family. It was a machine hidden behind respectability. Combat training became increasingly brutal. Professional fighters from around the world were secretly hired to train him. Boxing, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga, knife fighting, firearms, escape techniques. No style was considered complete. Every weakness was exploited. Every mistake was punished. One afternoon, 16-year-old Con sparred against 3 experienced instructors. He lost. Badly. His ribs were bruised. His nose was broken. His right shoulder was dislocated. Lying on the training mat, he stared at the ceiling. "I failed." Elias helped him stand. "No, you survived. They're different things." That lesson stayed with him forever. Despite becoming stronger each year, Con never escaped his nightmares. Every night, he dreamed of the hotel burning, his father's unfinished sentence, his mother's final smile. Sometimes he woke believing he could still smell smoke. Other nights, he heard gunshots that existed only inside his mind. Elias found him awake more often than asleep. One evening, He placed an old photograph on the table. It showed Con smiling between his parents in the garden of their family home. "Never forget this boy." Con stared silently at the picture. "I'm trying to become strong." "I know. But don't become so strong that you forget why." When Con turned 21, Elias finally revealed the next phase of the plan. He placed a thick file on the table. Across the front was one name: the Luca Group. Inside were photographs, financial reports, security layouts, biographies, and newspaper articles. For the first time in years, Con saw the faces of the two men responsible for his parents' deaths. Don Salvatore looked older now, but his expression remained unchanged. Cold, patient, untouchable. Then Con turned the page. Vittorio, no longer the silent young boy from the charity gala, now one of Europe's youngest billionaire CEOs. Educated, charismatic, respected. The public called him a visionary businessman. Intelligence agencies privately described him as one of the most dangerous men in Europe. He transformed his father's empire, Elias explained. He made it impossible to distinguish where business ends and organized crime begins. Con closed the file. So how do I reach them? Over the next 4 years, Con built a reputation in the criminal underworld under different identities. He exposed human traffickers, recovered stolen intelligence, negotiated impossible deals, protected high-profile clients. He never sought fame. He sought whispers. Soon criminals across Europe began speaking of a mysterious man who completed impossible missions without demanding recognition. Some called him the Ghost. Others called him the Devil's Shadow. Con didn't care what they called him. Every mission served one purpose: to place his name where it needed to be. On the De Luca family's desk, Elias entered Con's apartment carrying a black envelope. There it is. Con opened it slowly. Inside was a single invitation. The De Luca Group requests your presence. No signature. No explanation. Just a location. A private estate outside Milan. Con read the card twice before placing it back inside the envelope. 20 years. 20 years of preparation. 20 years of sacrifice. Elias stood beside the window. Remember what your father died protecting. I will. And remember what I taught you. Con nodded. Revenge without patience is suicide. Elias smiled faintly. For the first time since Con was a child, he saw not the frightened boy he had rescued, but the man capable of walking willingly into the lion's den. The next morning, Con put on a tailored black suit. He looked at his reflection one final time, then walked out the door. He wasn't going to ask the devil for revenge. He was going to earn the devil's trust, and once the devil welcomed him inside, he would destroy everything from within. The gates of the De Luca estate opened without a sound. Con's black sedan rolled slowly up the long stone driveway, passing centuries-old olive trees, marble statues, and fountains that looked more like works of art than decorations. The estate resembled a royal palace rather than a private residence. Every window reflected wealth. Every hallway whispered power. As the car stopped, Con stepped outside and adjusted his suit. His heartbeat remained steady. 20 years. 20 years had led him to these gates. Elias's final words echoed in his mind. Never let them see your hatred. The day they see your anger is the day they stop trusting your smile. A butler opened the massive oak doors. Mr. Khan. They're waiting. The library occupied nearly an entire wing of the estate. Thousands of books line shelves, stretching toward the ceiling. Ancient paintings covered the walls. A fire crackled quietly in the enormous fireplace. Standing beside it was an elderly man with silver hair and a perfectly tailored black suit. He wasn't physically imposing. He didn't need to be. His presence alone commanded silence. Every person in the room instinctively stood straighter. This was Don Salvatore de Luca, the man who could silence a room simply by entering it. His eyes met Con's. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Salvatore smiled. "So, this is the man everyone has been talking about." His voice was calm, soft, almost kind. Yet every word felt measured, as though even conversation was a weapon. Con inclined his head respectfully. "I've heard the same about you." Salvatore chuckled. "Most people who hear about me never get the opportunity to meet me." Before Con could answer, another voice interrupted. "I was beginning to think he wouldn't come." A younger man entered the room. Confident, elegant. His dark suit fit perfectly, and he carried himself with effortless authority. Unlike Salvatore, who resembled a king seated upon a throne, this man resembled a general who intended to conquer the world. Vittorio de Luca. 20 years had transformed the silent observer from the charity gala into one of Europe's most influential businessmen. He walked directly toward Con. His eyes studied every detail. The way Con stood, the way he breathed, the way he returned eye contact without intimidation. Finally, Vittorio extended his hand. "I've spent months hearing stories about you." Con accepted the handshake. "They're usually exaggerated." Vittorio smiled. "I dislike humble people. They're usually pretending." For the first time, Con smiled back. "Then it's fortunate I'm not humble." A brief silence followed, then Vittorio laughed. A genuine laugh. Salvatore noticed. Very few people ever made his son laugh. Dinner was served shortly afterward. The table was long enough to seat 30 guests. Only 3 chairs were occupied. Salvatore preferred privacy. He believed real conversations happened without witnesses. As courses arrived one after another, the conversation never drifted toward business. Instead, Salvatore asked unexpected questions. "What was the greatest mistake you've ever made?" Con answered honestly, believing strength alone solved problems. "And what corrected that belief?" "Losing." Salvatore nodded once. "A useful teacher." Vittorio leaned back in his chair. "If someone betrayed you, what would you do?" "I'd ask why. And if the answer wasn't good enough." Con looked directly at him. "Then I'd walk away knowing exactly who they were." Vittorio smiled faintly. "You don't believe in revenge?" Con paused. "I believe revenge changes the person seeking it." The words lingered in the room. For a brief moment, Salvatore's eyes narrowed, almost as if he had heard those words somewhere before. Then the feeling disappeared. After dinner, Salvatore led Con into a private study. The walls displayed photographs spanning 4 decades. World leaders, business icons, royal families. Salvatore appeared in every photograph, always smiling, always standing slightly behind the most powerful person in the room. Power, Con realized, wasn't something Salvatore displayed. It was something he quietly possessed. Salvatore noticed Con studying the photographs. People misunderstand influence. They think it's about being the loudest. He shook his head. "No. The strongest man in a room rarely raises his voice. Con remained silent. Salvatore turned toward him. Do you know why empires collapse? They become arrogant. A faint smile appeared. Exactly. For the first time that evening, Salvatore looked genuinely interested. The following morning, Vittorio invited Con to accompany him to the company's headquarters. The building overlooked Milan like a monument of glass and steel. Employees greeted Vittorio with admiration, not fear. He knew every executive by name. He congratulated a receptionist on her recent promotion. He remembered a janitor's birthday. He listened to junior employees as carefully as senior directors. Watching him, Con understood why Vittorio was so dangerous. People didn't follow him because they had to, many followed because they wanted to. Later that afternoon, Vittorio asked quietly, "What do you think?" "You built loyalty." Vittorio shook his head. "No. My father built loyalty. I built belief." There was no arrogance in his voice, only conviction. "I don't want people to work for me. I want them to believe there's nowhere better to belong." Con said nothing. For the first time, he saw something unexpected. Vittorio wasn't simply living beneath his father's shadow. He was trying to build one of his own. Whenever Vittorio asked for an opinion, Con answered honestly rather than trying to impress him. Oddly enough, that honesty became the reason Vittorio trusted him. Most people agreed with power. Con challenged it respectfully. One evening, after a long day, Vittorio poured 2 glasses of coffee. "You know why I keep you close?" Con looked at him. "Because I don't flatter you." Vittorio smiled. "Exactly. Everyone around me tells me what I want to hear. You tell me what I need to hear." But not everyone welcomed Con. One man, Marco Bellini, the company's longtime head of security, watched him with growing suspicion. Marco had served the De Luca family for nearly 30 years. He trusted instinct more than evidence, and every instinct told him Con was hiding something. During a security inspection, Marco confronted him. "You appeared out of nowhere. So did everyone once." Marco stepped closer. "I've learned one thing in 30 years. "What's that?" "The quietest man usually has the loudest secrets." Con held his gaze. "So does the man asking too many questions." Neither smiled. From that day forward, the 2 men never stopped watching each other. Weeks later, Salvatore summoned Con to the estate once again. This time, there was no dinner, no conversation, only a chessboard waiting between them. Without speaking, Salvatore moved the first piece. The game lasted nearly 2 hours. Neither man gained a decisive advantage. Finally, Salvatore tipped over his king. "You knew you could have won 20 moves ago." Con looked surprised. "I was waiting." "For what?" "To understand why you made certain sacrifices." Salvatore slowly stood. Then, for the first time, the old man placed a hand on Con's shoulder. "Most men play chess to win. You play to understand your opponent." He looked toward Vittorio, who had silently watched the entire game. "Keep him close." Vittorio nodded. "I intend to." As Con left the estate that evening, he paused outside the gates. 20 years earlier, he had dreamed of killing the De Luca family. Now, they had done something far more dangerous. They had welcomed him into their inner circle. The lion's den was no longer beyond his reach. He was living inside it. And neither the father nor the son had the slightest idea that the man they had begun to trust was the little boy who had survived the night they tried to erase him. Months had passed since Con entered the Luca organization. To everyone around him, he had become indispensable. Executives sought his advice before making major decisions. Employees respected him because, unlike many powerful men, he listened before speaking. The household staff admired him because he remembered their names. Even the guards, once suspicious of the quiet newcomer, now greeted him like an old friend. Only one man refused to lower his guard. Marco Bellini, the Luca family's aging chief of security. Marco had served Don Salvatore for over 30 years. He had watched governments rise and fall. He had buried friends. He had survived betrayals. His instincts had never failed him, and every instinct screamed the same warning. Con was hiding something. One rainy evening, Marco found Con alone in the mansion's library. "You read a lot." Con looked up from the old book. "It keeps my mind occupied." Marco smiled faintly. "No. It keeps your memories occupied." For a brief second, Con froze. Marco noticed. "You have the eyes of someone who hasn't slept properly in years. What happened to you?" Con closed the book. "Everyone loses something." Marco nodded slowly. "I hope whatever you're looking for is worth finding." He walked away. Neither man realized that conversation would be their last. The following morning, Don Salvatore summoned every senior executive. Among them were people Con had come to know. Sofia Moretti, the company's brilliant legal advisor, who secretly treated every employee like family. Luca Romano, the elderly chief financial officer who had worked for Con's father decades earlier, unaware of the connection. Adrian Volkov, head of international operations, a decorated former soldier who believed loyalty was earned, not demanded. Each of them respected Con. Each of them trusted him. That trust made what happened next unbearable. Don Salvatore entered the boardroom. The conversations stopped immediately. He walked to the head of the table without acknowledging anyone. Then he calmly placed a single folder on the polished wood. "My empire is bleeding." Silence. Someone is exposing information. Still no one spoke. Salvatore slowly looked around the room. "You have all served me faithfully. I sincerely hope that continues." There was no shouting, no threats. His calm voice frightened everyone more than anger ever could. He dismissed the meeting without another word. The message was clear. Someone would fall, whether guilty or not. Later that evening, Vittorio found Con standing on the terrace overlooking the gardens. "You seem distracted." "I'm thinking." "Dangerous habit." Con smiled slightly. Vittorio leaned against the stone railing. "You know what my father taught me?" "What?" "Trust is temporary. Loyalty is rented. Fear," he looked toward the city lights, "is permanent." Con remained silent. Vittorio sighed. "I spent my entire life trying to prove I could lead. But to him, I was never enough." For the first time, Con didn't see a ruthless executive. He saw a son who had spent decades chasing a father's approval. It didn't excuse what Vittorio had become, but it explained it. 3 nights later, Con returned to the hidden chamber beneath his childhood home. He carefully copied every document his father had hidden. Bank records, letters, photographs, audio recordings. One document stopped him cold. It contained a list of names. judges, cabinet ministers, corporate executives, intelligence officials, people his father had trusted, all secretly connected through Don Salvatore's influence. His parents hadn't died because they refused a business deal. They had discovered an entire network built on corruption and silence. The Luca family hadn't stolen a company. They had protected a system. Con secretly arranged for encrypted copies of the files to be stored outside the country. Only one person knew where they were. Elias. If anything happens to me, Con said quietly, the truth survives. Elias looked at him with pride. You've become stronger than I ever imagined. Con shook his head. I don't feel stronger. I feel tired. The next morning, everything collapsed. As Elias drove toward the secure location carrying one copy of the evidence, 2 black SUVs blocked the road. Masked men surrounded the vehicle. Elias fought fiercely despite his age. He managed to destroy the storage device before being overwhelmed. By the time Con arrived, the road was empty. Only shattered glass remained. And Elias's watch. Con picked it up with trembling hands. For the first time in years. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He had failed. The one man who had never abandoned him was gone. Back at the mansion, Marco intercepted Con. I know. Con looked at him. I don't know what you're talking about. Marco stepped closer. You disappear at strange hours. You ask questions nobody asks. And every time something goes wrong, you're nearby. He lowered his voice. I don't know who you are. But be careful. There are monsters in this house. They smile before they destroy you. Before Con could respond, security officers rushed down the hallway. Marco was called away. Those were the last words he ever spoke to Con. That evening, Don Salvatore invited Con into his private study. The old man stood before a chessboard. Without looking up, he asked, Tell me, Con, which piece is the most important? The king. Salvatore smiled. Wrong. He picked up a single pawn. The pawn. It walks one step at a time. It seems insignificant. But if it reaches the other side, it becomes anything. He slowly placed the pawn back onto the board. I built my empire using pawns. They believed they mattered. They believed I cared. They were useful. When they stopped being useful, I replaced them. He looked directly into Con's eyes. Never become emotionally attached to pieces. They only exist to be sacrificed. For the first time, Con saw the real Don Salvatore, not the respected businessman, not the charming philanthropist, but a man incapable of seeing human beings as anything other than tools. As Con left the study, he found Vittorio waiting outside. You survived. Con frowned. Survived what? My father. Vittorio gave a faint laugh. Most people spend an hour with him. They leave believing they're speaking to God. Con asked quietly, And you? Vittorio looked back toward the closed study door. I spent my entire life trying to earn his respect. His smile slowly disappeared. I finally realized something. What? The only way to impress a devil is to become one. Con looked at him for a long moment. For the first time, he understood. Don Salvatore had not created an empire. He had created a son in his own image. One ruled through absolute control, the other through absolute ambition. One manipulated people. The other mastered them. Together, they had become unstoppable. Until now. As Con walked into the darkness, grief weighed heavier than revenge. Elias was missing. The conspiracy was larger than he had imagined. The people he had begun to respect were unknowingly trapped inside a machine built by monsters. And for the first time in 20 years, Con wasn't certain he could win. Behind him, Don Salvatore stood alone at the library window, watching Con disappear into the night. Without turning around, he spoke quietly. "He's closer than ever." Vittorio looked confused. "Who?" "The little boy." A long silence followed. Don Salvatore's expression never changed. "I don't know how. But he's finally come home." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The hunt had changed. The devil no longer searched for his enemy. The devil knew his enemy was already inside his house. The once untouchable De Luca empire was collapsing. News channels across Europe reported investigations, resignations, and the freezing of corporate assets after anonymous evidence exposed years of corruption and abuse of power. Politicians denied involvement. Executives fled. Allies abandoned the De Luca name to save themselves. The empire that had taken 40 years to build was falling apart in 48 hours. Yet inside the estate, Don Salvatore De Luca sat calmly in the library, reading a book, as if nothing had changed, as if kings did not concern themselves with the collapse of kingdoms. Con walked through the silent corridors one final time. Every step echoed through the mansion. The guards who once stood proudly at every entrance were gone. Most had abandoned their posts. Others had surrendered peacefully after realizing the empire they served no longer existed. Con wasn't there for them. He had only one destination: the library, the room where Don Salvatore always waited. The old man slowly closed his book without looking up. "I've been expecting you." Con stood several feet away. "No guards." Salvatore smiled faintly. "When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that some meetings should happen without witnesses." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Salvatore broke the silence. "You're his son." It wasn't a question. Con nodded. "You knew." "I suspected." "When?" "The day we played chess. You didn't play to win. You played to understand. Only one other man ever did that. Your father." The room fell silent once more. Con's voice remained calm. "Why?" Salvatore stood and slowly walked toward the fireplace. "Because your father made the same mistake you have. He believed truth was stronger than power. He was wrong. He discovered things that could have destroyed everything I spent my life building. So you murdered him." I removed an obstacle. The words struck Con harder than any punch. "You killed my mother." Salvatore looked directly into his eyes. "I didn't order her death. But I accepted it. If you build an empire, people die." There was no regret, no apology, only certainty. For the first time in 20 years, Con's composure cracked. "You stole my childhood." Salvatore shook his head. "No. I gave you purpose." The library doors burst open. Vittorio entered, his suit stained with rain. He looked from his father to Con. "So, it really is you." Con slowly turned. "You remember me." "I remember every face." Vittorio's expression was unreadable. "I simply never imagined the frightened little boy would become the man standing before me." He stepped closer. You've destroyed everything. My father's empire. My future. My family. Con answered quietly. You destroyed mine first. For the first time in the story. Vittorio lost control. You think you're different? His voice echoed through the room. How many people have died because of your revenge? How many lives have you destroyed? You call us monsters. But look at yourself. Every word struck home. Con remembered every innocent person caught in the path of his mission. Every compromise. Every lie. Every life that had been lost. Vittorio smiled bitterly. My father was right. Revenge doesn't create heroes. It creates replacements. Salvatore slowly applauded. Excellent. He looked at Con. Do you understand now? I won 20 years ago. Not because I took your family, but because I shaped the man you became. You've spent your entire life thinking about me. You've sacrificed friendships, love, peace, your own humanity. You became exactly what I needed you to become. A devil. Silence filled the room. Con closed his eyes. For a brief moment. He saw himself as the frightened 5-year-old boy searching for his parents. He heard his mother's final words. Be brave. Not. Take revenge. His father had never wanted this life for him. Elias had trained him to survive, not to lose himself. For the first time, Con understood the difference. He opened his eyes. I am nothing like you. Salvatore smiled. Prove it. The old man reached into his desk and produced a pistol. He placed it on the table between them. I'm an old man. End it. Con looked at the weapon. Then at Salvatore. You want me to kill you in anger. I won't give you that. Instead, Con slid the pistol across the desk. You should answer for what you've done. For the first time. Don Salvatore looked disappointed. Then, in a sudden movement, the old man grabbed the pistol himself and fired. Con reacted instantly. The shot missed. A second shot rang out. Con closed the distance. The struggle lasted only seconds. The pistol fell to the floor. The two men fought hand to hand. Age had weakened Salvatore, but not his resolve. He attacked with surprising precision. Finally, Con disarmed him. Salvatore stumbled backward. He looked at the young man standing before him, then smiled. So this is how my empire ends. Con answered quietly. No. It ended the day you believed fear would last forever. Salvatore lunged one final time. Instinct took over. A single strike. The old man collapsed onto the polished marble floor. The same floor where, 20 years earlier, Con had watched his father die. Don Salvatore de Luca looked toward the ceiling. A faint smile crossed his face. It takes. He coughed. A devil. To defeat. His voice faded, his hand fell still. The king was dead. Silence. Then slow applause echoed from the doorway. Vittorio. He wasn't crying. He wasn't shocked. He simply stared at his father's body. The greatest man I ever knew. He laughed once. And I spent my entire life trying to become him. He looked at Con. You know what's funny? I hated him. Con frowned. But I also loved him. He never saw me as his son, only as his successor. Vittorio looked down at his father's body. And now? He's finally gone. Con stepped toward him. "It's over." Vittorio slowly shook his head. "No. It's only over for him." He looked directly into Con's eyes. "You destroyed my father, my name, my empire. I'll build another. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day. I'll come for you." He reached into his jacket. Con prepared himself. Instead of drawing a weapon, Vittorio removed a small silver chess piece, a black king. He placed it on the table. "My father always believed kings mattered." He smiled coldly. "I've learned something different. The game never ends." Without another word, he walked away through the broken doorway. Con didn't stop him, because he understood something. Killing Vittorio would end a life. Letting him live would force him to live with failure. Some punishments lasted longer than death. Weeks later, the investigations were complete. The Luca Empire had been dismantled. Its legitimate businesses were sold. Its victims were finally heard. Con legally reclaimed his father's company. Then, he returned home. Not the Luca estate. His own home. The house where his parents had laughed. Where his mother had played the piano. Where his father had promised to teach him how to ride a bicycle. Dust covered every room. Sunlight filtered through forgotten curtains. Nothing had moved in 20 years. Elias, now recovered after being rescued during the final operation, stood quietly in the doorway. "We're home." Con nodded, but the word felt empty. He walked into the living room and found the old family photograph still resting on the fireplace. His father smiling. His mother laughing. 5-year-old Con between them. He picked it up carefully. For 20 years. He had believed revenge would heal him. It hadn't. His parents were still gone. His childhood was still gone. His scars remained. He had reclaimed his home, his company, his family name. Yet the silence inside the house was louder than any victory. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "What now?" Con looked through the window as the sun began to rise. For the first time in 20 years. He didn't have an answer. Somewhere in another country, Vittorio De Luca watched the sunrise from the window of a train disappearing into the horizon. He turned a black chess king over in his hand. A faint smile crossed his face. "The old game is over," he whispered. "Now we play by my rules." And for the first time since he was 5 years old, Con realized that revenge had never been the end of his story. It had only been the chapter that defined him. Whether he remained a devil, or finally learned how to become a man again, would be the choice that shaped the rest of his life.